Hi again, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of When the Game Ends, episode 17. Ben Holden, Mike Carmen. Carmi, is always good to see you. What's going on in the city and the surroundings of Minneapolis where you're at?
Yeah, it's I'm a little better. I'm in a little better mood than I was last week when we started recording. A little weekend went a little bit better for my Gophers, so I was happy to be at both games and watch the sweep of Wisconsin. Um, I guess from our perspective with the pod, we've got some exciting stuff going on that you were working on over the weekend, and we are in the process of getting all the episodes up on Spotify now, so for easier listening purposes. So good work, guys. Since I know it's all you, I'm just tagging along. You put in a ton of work on that over the weekend.
It's all good. We'll have a training session one day, then we can divvy up some different duties. It's all good, man. We're excited. We're keeping our foot down, and we want to keep building here in 2025. And Carmi, we've got another great guest coming on today, of course. And we go back, as you may notice from our background, it's a rugby pitch. I've become a rugby guy in the last 4 or 5 years, doing Major League Rugby and working for World Rugby and doing a bunch of different things there. PR sevens in the U.S. as well. Will Hooley was on with us. I know our guest, Chris Mattina, who we're going to bring in a minute, knows Will very well. So we get another taste of a gentleman that has retired from the hooligans game, as they say in the sport of rugby. What are you looking forward to talking with Chris about before we bring him in here?
That is an apt nickname for the sport, the hooligans game. I still think it. People talk about what's tougher, hockey or football. I think rugby trumps them both. Less padding, lots of contact. I don't know how those guys do it. So I love hearing more and more about the game. You kind of filled me in a little bit, this 15s versus 7s. So I'm looking forward to kind of discussing the differences there between the game and what he liked more. So yeah, just continuing to expand my rugby knowledge. And like we talked about with Will, I'm dipping back into a very small piece of my childhood quite a while ago now, maybe 25 years ago at this point.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's bring in, without further ado, Eagle number 564, Chris Mattina, bottom of your screen. Chris, great to see you, and joining us all the way from Singapore, man. You are a dedicated young man. We appreciate your time. How are things where you are in the world?
Oh, they're doing great. It's a lovely 88 degrees. It's can't complain here. Life is good. They do things well in Singapore, so really happy to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. We're excited to have you, and we appreciate your time. And the premise of this podcast is, as the name says, when the game ends. And for you, you played 8 years pro, but you played the sport for over 15 years, which we'll get into competitively at high levels. So let's kind of start there in your situation. When did the game end for you? Ultimately, as a player, you're still involved. I know you're doing a lot of things away from the playing surface. But when did the game end for you, Chris?
So I decided back in July that I was going to hang up the boots. I'd finish up my Eagles tour with the boys, the USA boys over in Japan in the Pacific Nations Cup. And I think it was a bit difficult. I was trying to find a gig in Major League Rugby. I'd kind of bounced around a few teams, but at the end of the day, I think it was the right time, and I was ready to hang him up.
Yeah, so it's never easy to come to a decision, right? Ben filled me in a little bit beforehand, and it sounds like you had been with a team that had essentially, like, you had signed on to play another year, and then the team folded. Can you talk about what that experience was like? Did you see that coming, or did that come completely out of left field one day?
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the major factors in this all. I was supposed to return to my home team in New York. I'd played for them before, and then I kind of left, went to Austin, went to San Diego, went to Chicago. And my whole goal was to try and get back to New York. And I had that opportunity after I finished my season up in Chicago in 23. And then, I'd signed on for New York. I signed over the summer. I was really excited to get back to my family. I'm excited to be in one place, not traveling around every 6 months. And then, yeah, it kind of did come out of left field. We kind of heard rumblings over the couple months that things might not be up to par. We heard there was a sale that might be coming. So, whenever that's happening or being chatted about, it's never going to be a good sign, especially in Major League Rugby. But yeah, once, it started to get to November, started to get to December, certain things weren't lining up. Things weren't moving forward, even though we had all signed contracts. And then, we just got a text message from the owner in our WhatsApp group, basically telling us that the team wouldn't be going forward, and that New York would no longer exist. So it was a huge shock, super disappointing, kind of really just, I guess, broke me in terms of what I was trying to do in terms of my career and what I had been planning to do. It also made it difficult to find another team. That late in the process, this was December, and then the season would start in January. So, it really was difficult. It was a very, very difficult time. And I think that's kind of what, at that moment, I was like, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Just because it's tough to keep moving. That would make the third time in 3 years that I would be finding out where I was going to be living in January and December. So, it was a hard time, and definitely, I landed on my feet in San Diego, and it was a great group of guys, and we had a great team. But at the same time, New York was my home. I was so excited. I was like, if I had been there, I probably could, play a couple more years. But once that happened, it was very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine that's kind of a double whammy. Not only the career is ending, but you're excited about coming home and playing. So that kind of leads me to my next question. The rugby following in New York specifically, right? You're trying to come back and kind of play your last final years there. Is the rugby following really big there? Is it not as big, and maybe that hurt the team a little bit? That potentially led to the folding. What are your thoughts and kind of feelings from the support of the people of New York?
I think it's a difficult place to have professional sports. It's a huge city. You're competing with the city, the entertainment of the city. It's hard to get around. It's difficult, and I think from COVID onward, with the New York team, it was just difficult for them to find a home. There's not many stadiums that are 5,000 to 10,000 seaters, or even MLS stadiums that are within a range, within the city limits where people are going to come out and watch, that aren't too expensive. So, and I think that's the other thing. It's very expensive there. So I think the rugby community in New York's super strong. But I do think it is difficult to run a professional organization there. But at the same time, I think you have to really engage the community. I think people that know New York, can probably help in the community engagement piece. But I think that's something that is super important in the New York area.
So, Chris, when you went through all this, you used the phrase, it kind of broke you. So what did you go through, and when did you get to the point when you were finally at peace with what happened after all that took place, with the way you found out? We all found out that way, but I'm not a player. I'm a broadcaster in the league, so it's even harder for you. But like, with all sincerity, what did you go through in those moments, and when did you finally come to, okay, I got to move on and do what you're doing now, which we'll get into?
I don't know. I think I just masked it up by going to San Diego.
Okay.
I think it was something that it was hard to really get over. And I think, I think going to San Diego maybe, and getting stuck in with the boys there, and starting to kind of put yourself back into another preseason where you're working hard and trying to get to a goal of winning a Major League Rugby championship, kind of takes it away. But I mean, at the same time, there was just reverberating effects. My family, my partner, having to move again last minute, expecting to be home, expecting to be in our apartment, signing a lease. So, I think there was longer effects. I probably suppressed those once I got to San Diego, but I think now it's okay. But I think that definitely led to some more. Yeah, there's still some more issues as we went on.
Yeah, and you played in New York for parts of 3 seasons. Of course, you lost COVID. The whole league did. Only played 5 matches. So where I'm going here, you're a guy that grew up in Manhattan, Upper East Side, I believe is where
Yeah.
you grew up.
Yeah.
So having had that experience of just, yeah, you're not playing in the city and you guys played in a smaller stadium. I did a lot of your games in there. What was it like looking back at that part of your career, being from the great city of New York, getting to play for a team that calls New York home?
Yeah, it was special. The first season where, Mike Tolkien is our head coach. He was my head coach in high school and in the adult game, and we made a semifinal in the first year with some great players, some great relationships. My family coming to every game, my friends coming to every game. It was a really special time, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it was some of my best moments in my rugby career were played in New York and within that setup. And a lot of my teammates and American guys that were coming through were my old high school teammates. So, we had a great group of guys, great group of Americans that, it was a really fun time, and we had a blast, and we had a great team too. So it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed my years. But, I think branching out and going to Austin and going to Chicago were probably the best things for my rugby career, and being able to learn different things and be in different coaching staffs and different setups was super important for me to do. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise leaving. But, New York was special. It's a special place. Born and raised, played high school rugby there, played men's adult league there. And, to play pro there as well was something that's super dear to me. And I hope it comes back one day.
Well, I mean, real quick, Carmi, and you don't have to respond here, but to me, the league in this country needs a team in New York. I mean, they clearly do. So,
yeah, I think it fits right in with the East Coast teams. I'd love to see a team in Philly as well. I went to University of Delaware, and I think Philly has a great rugby community and a great sports town. But yeah, New York, you need New York. You need LA, you need New York, just based on the sheer size. But I think the rugby community is super strong in those areas too. And, Europe is very close, and there's a lot of expats there that would love the game too. So, no, I agree with you. It's super important, especially for TV.
So what I was going to ask was, there's a lot of players that will talk about when you play somewhere where you grew up, and, it can be a dream come true, or it can also be a challenge because of all the distractions going on with everybody around and wanting to be involved in your career. And so did you ever have any of that when you were playing in New York, or was it all kind of like a very positive experience for you?
I think it was all positive. I mean, I think just being around your family and supporting you. I also started my rugby academy there, so I was coaching a lot of the high school and youth kids in the area, which kind of provided a secondary income for us, which is really good. And be able to build something in your community, which was really special. And I think that's in New York. I have a lot of those connections, so I think that was really great. But no, I'd say that overall it was really supportive. To be near my family, to be near my friends as well. I think that was awesome, and to be able to do that and play in front of them, which you don't get many opportunities to do that, was really just overall really great experience.
You talk about playing in front of your family. So I was reading up a little bit. It sounds like your dad and your uncle played. So were they the main reason that got you into rugby? Kind of talk about their influence on your rugby career.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I used to go out as a kid to their games. They played on Randall's Island, where I ended up playing in high school. I remember going out there, and it used to be potholes and grass and sewer covers on their field.
Oh, boy.
So it was a bit rough, but it was a good time. But I honestly, they didn't have much influence on when I actually started playing. My dad played football when he was growing up, so I loved American football. I wanted to be a wide receiver in the NFL. I played basketball, I played soccer, all those things growing up. And then it just happened that I got into Xavier High School for high school. And I didn't even know that they had a rugby team, but I knew they had a football team. So I was like, okay, I'll go to Xavier. I started playing football. And when I got there, they were like, oh, we actually have this great rugby team. I think you would love the game of rugby, because when I was playing football, I was kicking, I was playing defense, I was playing running back. I was playing, corner. I was playing kick return, punt return. I was like, I'm basically playing rugby while playing football. I was playing like all 5 phases of the game. And then I started playing rugby, and I was like, okay, this is my sport. Like, this is exactly what I want to play. And my dad and my uncle were just so excited, and they didn't really push me to do anything. But once I found it, they were like, yeah, we love this. And they've been the biggest advocates for me and the biggest supporters of my career throughout this whole thing, from the old boys that they used to play with. And, it's been a great experience for them, but also just having them support me.
Chris, you mentioned all the different spots you played, and that leads me into something I knew it would come up at some point, but you were a versatile guy when you played. So looking back, how much do you feel all the stuff you did, whether it was just in football or all the other sports you played, allowed you to play the fullback spot, the center position, the wing position, and something we'll get into, maybe it comes up here, but the fact that you played 15s and 7s, how much did all that stuff help you looking back on it?
Yeah, I think playing multiple sports definitely was something that, has put me ahead in my career. I think playing soccer as a kid, like that's, having the ability to kick the ball, as simple as it is. Not many American rugby players can do it consistently. And I think playing soccer growing up was the main influence of how I became a great kicker, or a good kicker at least. But yeah, I think that all of that movement, the speed work, the vision of the game, I think, all those sports definitely contributed to that. And then my dad as well, just being an ex-football player and basketball player, definitely helped too. So yeah, they're super important for my development. Me and my friends also used to go play tackle football because there was no peewee football in Manhattan. We used to go to the park and just play tackle football with no pads on, every single day after school. So, I think probably that also even just that, tackling each other with no pads on as kids, just in the park probably had a big influence on my career too. So, it was super important. And I think I try to do that with all my training techniques. And when I coach, is just trying to expose kids to as much different movement as they can and, have fun.
Well, I think that's a big difference between, you think about like a field goal kicker in football, right? Or the kicking you're doing in rugby. Field goal kicker's got 30 seconds to get set, make sure he's ready to go. I mean, so much of the kicking, from my little knowledge of rugby, seems very fluid, right? It's happening live, it's happening quick. And so, like, to your point, being able to do that, quickly, agilely, and effectively is a pretty special talent to have. Now, as someone who doesn't, know a ton about the rugby scene, 7s versus 15s, I want to hear kind of what are the big differences? Which one did you like better? For listeners that are in the same boat as me, come on, help break it down for us a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with 7s because that's kind of where I started my pro career. But, 7s is it's fast. You're running high speed meters, constantly. You're basically sprinting the whole time for 7-minute halves. It's 7-on-7 on the same size field as a 15s match, which is 15-on-15. And 7s is, it's so much fun as a player because it's just constant. There's a lot of space, and there's almost so much pressure on you, even as a defense, to like make sure you're making your one-on-one tackles. Because if you miss a tackle, they're going to go score. Then on attack, it's just a numbers game. You're just really trying to read defenses and trying to create mismatches against them, and then put your fast guys into space so that they can score. But 7s is a great game to be introduced to the game because it's a little bit more simple. It's not as chaotic. It's a little bit easier to kind of grasp, I would say, for a new fan. But it also has that excitement factor. It has all the kicking. It has, not much kicking, a little bit less kicking, but more running, all the rucking as well. But it's such an exciting, fun game, which is why it's in the Olympics. And, I think you see when kids start playing it, they start with 7s, and I think that's a really great place to start. But then once you get addicted to it, you go into the 15s game, And that's where you really see more of the strategy. It's more of like that American football feel where you have your forwards who are kind of like your O linemen and your D linemen. You have your backs, which are more of your running backs and your wide receivers. And you kind of are just working together to, break down a defense. You're using kicking as more kicking as a strategy. So you have your punters and your kickers. You have your kick returners and your guys that are better tacklers, your linebackers. So, I think 15s is a much more fun, strategic game, whereas sevens is more like raw speed, raw ability. You can go out there and just run through people, run around people, and have fun. Whereas 15s, it's like more skill, more strategy, which does create a really fun environment, especially for bigger guys, but also like playmakers and some speedy guys too.
It's kind of
sevens is a great way. Sorry, Ben, real quick. I would imagine sevens is a great way for, like you said, the younger generation that is getting involved in the game to play, because they're going to get more touches. They're going to be more into it. It's not going to be like, if you put a bunch of little kids 15 on 15 on the field, I imagine that gets a little chaotic. So I can see why that would be pretty beneficial. I got to ask too, I imagine the 7 scores are higher than the 15 scores typically.
They actually aren't, because they actually just because the game is so much shorter. So the game is only 7-minute halves in sevens, and the game is 40-minute halves in 15s. So
that makes sense because you're running quite a bit. Shorter halves.
You're almost running. You're not running the same amount, but you're running like in terms of like high speed running, which is like certain number and above, like basically above a jog. You're almost doing the same amount of that running in a sevens match as you will as like an entire 15s match, which is
okay.
Crazy.
Second part of that question before I let Ben go: are the hits bigger in sevens because of how fast you guys are moving on the dead sprint more often?
There's some big shots, but I would have to say that 15s is more contact. It's definitely bigger shots just because there's bigger bodies out there. Sevens,
okay.
You have to be leaner, you have to be fitter, faster, because you're covering so much ground as a defender. I think that's probably also another thing. It's like you're covering so much space as a defender in sevens that you really don't have much opportunity to just go smash somebody. Sometimes you do. There definitely are big hits that happen, but in 15s, I would say, just because of the size of guys, because you can kind of you need bigger guys in the forwards, like the O lineman size. Like there's some like 250 and above, like there are some big boys running out there. So you're going to get some bigger impacts out there, and they're tackling us. The lighter, the backs, the faster guys out wide. So there's definitely more contact. There's definitely bigger hits in 15s, just on the sheer body size.
Okay, so I was 0 for 2 there on my thoughts.
Yeah.
So Chris, tell me your thoughts on this. So you played in the PR7s, right? At least 1 year. Didn't you play 2 or just 1?
Yeah. Just the first season. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that was the first time I was ever exposed to sevens. And I like both. I like the sevens because of the speed, and Carmi knows this because I got a hockey background. I equate it this way to those that might be watching. It's like watching a hockey game and you go from 5-on-5 to 3-on-3 because all you have is space and opportunity for your home run guys to, in essence, hit home runs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I always thought that sevens is like hockey, and I always thought if I had to play another sport, I'd play hockey, just because of the like the continuousness of the game. Like I love the continuous nature of it, where it's like you're on offense, you're on defense, you're trying to score, then you're trying to defend, and the ability to just be flowing in that state, and then you also making the decisions kind of yourself. Like you don't have a coach telling you, like in football, it's like run this play. And you're like, okay, well, I don't know if I want to run this play, but we're going to do it anyway. But that's hockey is a similar way. It's very flow based. It's very like you're in the game, you're focused on what's happening and you're making decisions. So yeah, I think it's a great comparison.
I had that same thought when we were talking, when you were talking earlier, when I was asking about like the, kind of the fluidity like of the kicking, right? Where you don't have 30 seconds to line up a field goal. And, so the similarities from that aspect are definitely there, because if you look at some of the other sports, like, baseball is not a fluid sport. Football, you just talked about, is not a fluid sport. Basketball, you could argue, is a fluid sport, but there's still a reset and way more set plays going on, it feels like.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you would have wanted to have been a hockey player too, from the, like I said, the versatility and the fluidity of the game.
Yeah, I just love that aspect of it. I don't know why. I've always liked it. I couldn't do baseball. I couldn't stand out there and nothing happening. I respect it, but I just couldn't do it. But I loved, the continuous, like the hockey. And that's why I kind of, when I found rugby, I was like, oh, it's basically football, but it's continuous, plus some soccer, plus some basketball, plus some hockey. So you're like, this is the perfect game. It's, as like a player, it's so much fun. Just to be able to go out there, and there's so many different things that can happen. There's never the same thing that's never going to happen twice almost in rugby. Like, you're always going to have a new situation that you have to figure out. So it's just like an ever evolving puzzle, which makes it a lot of fun for players, and especially playmakers who are in those decision making positions.
Your former teammate, Carmi, I'm not making this up, his name is Dylan the Butcher Fawcett. He's a hooker. You played with him for 3 years, right, Chris? He is.
Yes.
He's approaching 100 caps in Major League Rugby. And I bring him up, Chris, because I ran into him at the Scotland USA match. We were in the same hotel this past summer. And we got talking, and I never met Dylan. I said, what other sport would you play? And he looked at me with that stern look he's got, and he said, I want to be a hockey player, but I can't skate. So it's a great debate, man, which sport you guys are more nuts in. I mean, it's the ultimate respect. I want to stay with the sevens thing with you. So you were playing, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will, you're playing at the New York Athletic Club, right? That's when the sevens opportunity with USA came up. Is that true? And if so, can you walk us through how that all played out for you in your career?
Yeah, so I started playing sevens more when I was at University of Delaware. We had a really good sevens program. Biddy Boyle and Chris Ryan, two legendary coaches from the Mid-Atlantic rugby scene, and they were amazing and really helped develop my sevens ability. But then once I graduated college, I played for New York Athletic Club. But I was playing for basically the seven circuit in the Northeast is a summer circuit. So after I would go home from University of Delaware, every summer I'd start playing for New York Athletic Club. So, that really honed my skills. You're playing against grown men on an adult circuit as a college player. And I played that for 5 years. And then as soon as I graduated from University of Delaware, I played one full season with New York Athletic Club after I moved back to New York. And we played actually in the national championship game for 15s out in Denver against what would then become the Austin Huns, which was the first Austin Major League Rugby team. And we lost to them on a last-minute try in the national championship game. But the USA assistant coach, Chris Brown, was actually at the game. And I had a really, really good game, scored a really nice try, set up a bunch of really good tries, just had a really, really strong game. And I get to the locker room after the game, and I check my phone, and Chris Brown had followed me on Instagram. And I was like, all right, that's interesting. Like, I wonder if he was here. And then I get an email from them inviting me out to camp in Chula Vista for USA Sevens the following summer. And once that happened, I was just ready to take my opportunity, went out to camp in San Diego, and just had a really strong camp, and from there was offered a contract with USA Sevens. So it all happened very fast. It was funny because I was working. I just decided I was going to try and go back to physical therapy school. So I was taking classes at a community college in Manhattan. And then, this opportunity came up to go play for the US Sevens team. And, and I was crazy because I'd been watching them play for such a long time. I'd seen all the legends, and I was always watched them as a kid or growing up once I started playing rugby. And to go out there and have the opportunity to train and play with them was incredible. So that's kind of what kicked off my professional rugby career.
So what does that look like then when you make the USA team? What is your schedule like? Who are you playing? What are you preparing for? What are the big events? What's a typical season of being on the USA Sevens look like?
So we are full-time contracted players out of San Diego, California. We train at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista full-time. And it's very intense. The training is pretty nuts, to be honest, because it's just a lot of running and a lot of lifting and a lot of playing rugby. But during a high performance camp week, which would be like a lead up into a tournament, your week is super heavy. You're training, you're pretty much in the facility from Monday to Friday. 7 a.m. You're getting breakfast at the food hall. Then you have a lift. Then you have 2 field sessions, probably one that's more of a skill-based session, but a little bit of running, and then lunch, and then a big field session, which is 2 to 3K, like fast. You're pretty much about to keel over by the end of it. And then you just kind of rinse and repeat throughout the week. You have an offense day, you have a defense day, and then Friday is usually what they used to call a yaka yard, which is just getting absolutely smoked for an hour and a half with assault bikes, sleds, running, up downs, the whole 9 yards, just really putting yourself through the ringer. But it really accelerated where I was at physically. And then the season is pretty crazy as well. So you're basically playing tournaments from December to June. Every month there's like a leg, and a leg is in a different country basically. So when I was playing, my debut was in Australia, in Sydney. I played there, and then the next leg we went to New Zealand. So the next weekend you fly straight to New Zealand, you play a tournament there, and then you fly home. Then you have 3 weeks at home, then you fly out to another destination, and you have a leg there. So when I was playing, we did Sydney, New Zealand, flew back home. Then we went Singapore, Hong Kong, flew back home, Vancouver, Vegas, stayed home, and then finished up with England, London, and Paris. So, I got to travel the world, which was one of the most awesome experiences of all time. And to do that while playing the sport that you love and with, representing your country was, something that I'll never forget. And, it was a really special time. And, you're just breathing and sleeping rugby, which is, all you could really ask for as an athlete.
Yeah, it's you're the USA stuff is incredible. I had the opportunity to wear a country's colors, and it's something I'll never forget. I got to go overseas, and not quite as much as you were going overseas for tournaments, but definitely went overseas for some events, and that's always a blast. Your schedule, it's interesting because this was post college for you, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so but Ben, what I like in this too, and what this sounds a lot like, is Ann Arbor, like the U.S. Well, Plymouth now, but the U.S. program, which is where I was, Chris, in high school, my junior and senior year. But it was super intense, playing against older guys every weekend. You get out of school at 1 o'clock and go to the rink until 7 o'clock, practicing Olympic lifting, which, as we all know now, is probably not the best for hockey, maybe some other sports, but just going to town on the weights Monday to Thursday, and then going out and playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then doing it all over again. But same as you, I loved it. It propelled my career, and I still say there's no chance that I would have been able to come into college at 18 ready to go without that experience. So I found a lot of similarities to what you were talking about there.
Yeah, it definitely put me at the next level of like physicality, in the gym, strength, but then even just the skills work. Like we did so much skills work there that it really just honed all those skills, and just being in that intensive environment, full time, just propelled me. And I don't think I would have been able to do any of the Major League Rugby stuff afterwards without being in the sevens program and being there to, just learn, but also just get fitter and stronger and more skilled. I think that's really what helped me be a versatile player as well, Ben. Like what we were talking about before was being in the sevens program just helped me, just be, build those skills and be able to hone that in full time.
Yeah, I got you for 24 caps, 8 World Sevens Series events. Is that right?
Yep.
So I'm getting my first taste. I'm honored. I'm blown away that I got asked to work Vancouver and LA this year. So man, I am. Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
I know how big it is. I've become television partners with a guy I know you know really well, Zach Test. Who I mean, Chris will tell you, Carmi, he's a legend in sevens, man. Yeah, he really is. And so I'm excited for that. I may reach out to you through some text and pick your brain a little bit if you're cool with that. But
absolutely,
where I wanted to go with you is you guys are talking about, like Carmi and what he did and what you did at that age. And so like, what was it that ultimately you said, okay, I'm going to go try to play Major League Rugby, which you did starting in 18 when you were doing all this. So how did all that transpire for you and lead you into rugby union with 15s in Major League Rugby?
Actually, so I was actually 22. I graduated from the University of Delaware and then was in the sevens for a year and then went to Major League Rugby. I did finish up my school just because, actually Major League Rugby wasn't even around when I was in college. So
right.
It essentially started the year that I got to the sevens program, which was super interesting. But I think the decision was very difficult to leave sevens because, you're looking at, I'd made all these tournaments, the Olympics was a couple of years away, and it was the pipe dream of wanting to play in Olympics is very strong. So, it was a really difficult choice. And I think I always thought maybe I'd try and go back at some point. But, I think the pinnacle of rugby is to play in the Rugby World Cup in 15s. And to do that, you kind of have to go and play 15s because sevens is such a different game. So, I think New York popped up. New York, the team entered the league the year after I played my first seven series. So I think I looked at it as, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to go play for a professional team in New York, in my hometown. The coach was Mike Tolkien, who is my old high school and my old adult coach, club coach.
Tolks.
Yeah, absolute legend. And so, it was a really tough choice. But, the World Cup was coming up the year after. I was really interested in trying to go for that. Tolks was in New York. My family was in New York. I'd kind of taken all the things that I've learned in sevens and said, look, I can try and make a run at this thing and see what I can do and go home and play for the New York team. But it was definitely a jump. It was definitely a leap of faith, I would say, looking back on it. But definitely one of the best things I've done. And, I'm really happy that I did it because, I got to play in Major League Rugby and, eventually get to the Eagles and play 15s for the Eagles too. So, but it was definitely, it was a scary time. It was a big decision to make because they did offer me another contract at sevens and I kind of had to turn them down. So it was tough.
Real quick, Carmi. So how many caps you had? 15? 6? Is that the right number?
7. Yeah.
7. I'm sorry. Yeah. So 7 was on the last fall tour overseas, right? That was your last cap.
Yeah, that was my last cap, but I got capped for the first time last year. 2 years ago, 2020.
Yeah, 23, right?
Yeah, 23.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Just wanted to.
So it took me a while. It took me.
Yeah.
It took me from 2019 to 2023 to get into it. So.
I mean, it's so as I've learned working with guys like Zach and Colin Howley and Petrie, and I know Petrie didn't play sevens, but for the Falcons, obviously the 15s guy. I mean, that's remarkable. I mean, it just speaks to me about the athletes that the men and women that play rugby are, man. It's phenomenal. I mean, so my question here for you is, you're 31, you retire. Physically, how do you feel? How's your body at this stage of your life?
I think it's all right. It's pretty good. I did have a lot of
Okay.
like little bumps and bruises. After that last tour in Japan, I got smoked. I got smashed in the Fiji game, and the 13 dumped me on my shoulder. So my shoulder is still a little bit sore, to be honest. It's been a couple months.
Wow.
But overall, I actually feel pretty solid. I think that was probably went into a little bit of my retirement as well. It's just like I don't want to go out, in a big injury or on an injury that takes you out and you don't go out on your own terms. So I think that was a little bit of it. But I had surgery on my foot last year in April, which kind of helped me out a lot of the MLR season. So you're definitely getting a lot of bumps and bruises, and you definitely start to feel it after the age of 30. So I have so much respect for the guys that are 40 playing in the league. Like, I don't understand how they do it.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of discipline, but it's quite insane to think about.
I say it all the time. I don't know how guys are still playing. So I'm 36, about to be 37, and I don't know how guys are still playing at this age. I mean, I've had a couple of surgeries myself, and obviously, like you said, there's bumps and bruises and things that you feel more as you get older, whether it's just something nagging, whatever it is, right? I did have a question, though. And you said Major League Rugby essentially came about right when you were finishing up your Eagles. Was that the timing? That I have that correctly? Your Eagles season was
for the sevens. Yeah,
for sevens. Okay. So when Major League Rugby is coming onto the scene, it's brand new. What was that like? What were some of the challenges, maybe things you didn't expect to have to deal with? You think you're going to play professional? It's always fun because, like, I played in the minor leagues, and I'm very well aware of how spoiled I was in college. And then I go to the minors, and it's a very different story. So I'd love to hear some stories about what those first seasons were like.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a learning experience, I would say. I think, like, getting back there was, I mean, the first season we were basically it was like glorified club. We were training at 7 to 9 at night. We were going to a random gym throughout the day that we were sharing with a bunch of meatheads in Queens. There was a lot of things that they were still figuring out. And it was difficult, but I think it all made up for it with the guys that were on that team. The things that I learned from some of the overseas players that had come over. We had Ben Foden, we had Matthew Bastereau, we had some of the legends of the international game had come over, and I think that made up for all the craziness in terms of logistics and operations that we were trying to figure out. But they did improve it very quickly. By year 3, like COVID year, we had a pretty decent setup. But yeah, those first years, second year we were going to Staten Island. I was taking the ferry to Staten Island, getting in a van to go to the school, and then training there for the day. I was working in the kindergarten, as an after-school teacher. So there was a lot of different things you're doing just to kind of continue to play the game. But those memories will make you stronger as a person, I would say.
That's actually, Ben, that reminds me of some of the guys that go play in Europe. Depending on where you go in Europe, some of those smaller countries or second or third tier leagues, those guys, the imports, they're coming in and they have all this downtime. You just have practice, but they're practicing at 6, 7 at night because the rest of the team has to work a job during the day. So that's where I drew that comparison there for sure.
Yeah. It's definitely improved. Like, pretty much now every single team is full time and they're on a full time schedule, which is great. But they definitely learned from some of the earlier years. So being a part of that was super interesting. It gives you a lot of good perspective.
Yeah, and so not only in New York, but I'm sure things when you went to Chicago, they were an expansion team. I'm sure things were a little bit more organized there than they were when the league started. I mean, I didn't get involved personally until 19, and then I didn't come back because of COVID until till 21. But yeah, I'm curious on Chris. I want to give you the opportunity here in a couple of things that you're doing in your post retirement. You mentioned you've been coaching. Sounds like you've been doing that for a while. So what are you doing in that regard now that you got time and you're not playing anymore? Tell us about that and what's that like in your life now?
Yeah, so I've started my own little private coaching called CM Rugby Academy. It's really just working in small groups and one-on-ones with kids in the New York area who want to improve their game. A lot of youth coaching, high school and younger, just teaching them a lot of skill-based stuff, kicking, passing, all the stuff that I wish I had when I was a kid growing up. But be able to just really take, personalized coaching and really apply it to these kids. They really enjoy it. They want more of it. They want more rugby. So, I've been starting to work with a lot of the kids there. And then also on the other front, I'm working with a nonprofit called Rugby for All. Our goal is to essentially bring rugby to, schools in the city area, whether it's after school, whether it's in the curriculum, whether it's in gym classes, and really just expand the game, introduce it to as many kids and students as possible, and create good experiences with that. So, that's kind of the two-pronged approach that I've had in terms of trying to grow the game, and really just support the New York community with, my experiences and everything that I've learned.
Was that your plan kind of, pretty quickly when you got done, you're like, hey, I'm already involved in coaching. I'm going to follow this and help, kind of pass along what I've learned in the game. Did it take you a minute to decide that's what you wanted to do and kind of branch out into more of a full-time career? What was the thought process when everything wrapped up for you?
Yeah, I think it was always there. It was kind of, something I started during COVID, actually, because we weren't playing and all the kids were kind of sitting around, not going to school and not playing any organized sports. So, it's always been there in the background, and I think it's my way of staying connected to the game. So, as soon as I was done, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to stay involved. I'm definitely going to stay involved in the coaching scene, just because I feel like I've always thought like it would be a waste if I didn't pass on, some of the stuff that I learned, and especially as a homegrown player and born American player, there's not many of us out there that have made it to the next level. So I think passing that down and showing kids that it is possible was really important to me. So it was always something I was going to do. It's just kind of now it's like, how much can you do when you're trying to figure out life and job as well.
Yeah. And as we know in the rugby world, Chris, that's what you just said is what it's going to take to keep developing and building this sport in the country. We're 6 years off now from the World Cup, and I know that's something near and dear to your heart. I mean, you mentioned that's the pinnacle in the sport. Are you seeing more and more kids? What are you seeing in that regard? Are more kids getting involved? Are they wanting to get involved in the sport?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Olympics was massive for us. I think
Yep.
Alona has been massive for the sport of rugby.
Mm-hmm.
She's taken the thing to the next level. She's transcended the game, to be honest. And
Yep.
you can kind of just see that within the youth community. People know what rugby is. Like, I think the stigma of rugby was like, it's a crazy game. They're not wearing pads. They're just, smashing each other, and, they're just, running around crazy. It's like kill the carrier. But
Right.
now it's kind of like this powerful thing that, is used for positive, body image and fitness and, getting kids moving. So you're definitely seeing a shift in the overall thought process on it. Like, I think it's just like the door has been cracked now. It was hard to get into schools. It's hard to, add more sports to schools, but they kind of know what rugby is now because of the Olympics. So it's like,
Yep.
oh, I might be interested in that. So now it's our job to, truck the door down and try and get it into more schools and get more kids playing. But I think the door has definitely been cracked. There's more interest in it, and I think you do see more kids being open to it, and even just parents being open to it as well.
Yeah, and that kind of, I guess, transitions into, something else we wanted to talk to you about. We know, kind of that, or I know now because of Ben, that you're involved, with the rugby PA stuff and, working on that side of things. Was there any sort of a PA when you first came into the league? Was that something they tried to initiate right away? Is that something that developed a few years in post-COVID? Kind of what led to the development of the PA and your involvement in that as well?
Yeah, so there was the U.S. Rugby Players Association, which was started in 2017. They had looked after all the USA players. So, everyone has been capped by the USA Sevens and 15s, men's and women's. They fall under the US RPA. We kind of started looking at PA stuff for the MLR in 2021. My predecessor, Nick Savetta, did an amazing job, trying to get this thing started. And, I think it kind of, the initial things were, concussion, head impact assessments. So before, I think it was 2020 or 2021, there was no HIA is what they call it in rugby, which is something they do at every level overseas. And essentially that is, if someone gets a concussion on the field, they have to go and do an assessment. In the 10th, they get taken off the field and made sure that they're okay to keep playing. And Major League Rugby didn't have that, and Nick pushed extremely hard for that. And that was kind of the start of organizing the PA and organizing the MLR side of things, because he was playing for New York as well. And I'd always been interested in players associations, and in 2020, I had reached out to DeMaurice Smith, who was the head of the NFL PA. And I hadn't been doing anything with our PA, or we didn't really have a PA. And I was like, I think we need something like this. It's a little bit early on in the league's career, in the league's existence, but I think we could benefit from this. And I think especially in this league, like I think it's something that we needed, just based on how some of the contracts were being written, little things that I'd heard from my teammates, who had come over. So, I really started to get interested in it then, and that kind of just kept going and building over the years. And then, I really got involved more in it in 2022 and 23. And I'd kind of worked under Nick when he was starting it.
Do you think COVID really kind of helped shine a light on all that too? I mean, you talk about one of the, the main functions of the PA, right, is protecting players' rights and contracts, like you talked about, being executed. And I'm sure you can't go into too much detail, but did COVID help kind of bring like, hey, we need to protect guys for, when seasons get canceled for this reason, or, anything like that?
Not actually, no. COVID actually was not bad. Well, because the owners paid everyone out their contracts, so COVID actually they did pretty well. So I wouldn't say that COVID was honestly a factor in making the PA. Like they did a good job. We were happy that they did that, and really grateful that they had paid everyone out their contracts for the year. So that was really not a contentious issue. I would say more so around the teams folding was where it started to really gain a little bit of momentum. I think, there's been a good amount of team foldings over the last couple of years, Austin and LA, New York, Toronto, Atlanta moved. So Dallas now. So I think the foldings of the teams was probably where that started to happen, just because you saw guys kind of being left, in the lurch a little bit. And, I would say that that's probably a primary, among other things, other issues.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I would say that, really the Austin, the LA situation is really where you saw this gain a little bit more momentum.
Do you have anything else to add about the PA stuff, Ben?
No, I was gonna ask Chris. I got a couple fun things I want to close with. I like doing that, as Carmi knows. But I wanted to ask you your advice. Like you're early, man. Carmi was early. He was 26 when he retired. 31. Maybe it's not early, the sport you guys both played are two, to me, two of the three most physically demanding sports you can play. What would your advice be to somebody that may catch this, or just somebody you may talk to that's a player or they're getting close to the end? What do you say to them, Chris, about preparing?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the first thing you probably should do is prepare.
Yeah.
and figure out how to prepare. I think is important, because the detail and you can kind of take classes, you can kind of network, but understanding how to prepare for life after it is important. And I think accepting that. I think a lot of players. I was at this great conference last week about player development, and they're like, you want to keep the main thing. You want to keep your sport. You think that you're going to, you have to put all your energy into this. And if you start thinking about after the game or when you retire, then, that might take away from, what you're doing now. And I just think that that's not the case. I think, some of the great players, they're able to do multiple things at once. They're able to play the game at a high level, prepare for the game at the high level, but also look after themselves and prepare themselves for life after the game. And I think that's a super important quality to have. And that'll help you once you get to this point, and not just going in cold turkey.
It's something we've never really talked about too much, Ben, is the prevalence of athletes being involved in their own brands and companies, and whether they're starting a brand or partnering with somebody on a brand. You see more and more of that, maybe in the last 10, 15 years, where guys do have other completely functioning running businesses. So when they finish their career, they have that to go to right away. And clearly, like Chris is saying, that there could be a stigma out there that it detracts from what you're doing at that time and takes your focus away. And reality is that's not true. Like, part of being, a student athlete, right? Especially in college, you're balancing school, you're balancing playing a sport. Same thing in pro, even if you're not running a business, you're balancing your personal life outside of the game too, whether it's, wife, kids, family. So that's a very interesting point. It's the first one we've heard bring that up. There's been a lot of similarities with a lot of the people we've had on with the advice, but I think that's kind of the first time we've really had this come up where you can do two things simultaneous.
Yeah, and I have to give credit. I went to a conference last week called the ADLA, and essentially their goal is they're basically all the player development groups of all the major sports leagues and players associations, and kind of talk about best practices and how do you get players to engage with the support staff. And that was the one thing that really stuck out to me. It was like, they're like, there are studies done, like the best players are preparing themselves off the field. They have a good balance. They can look after their business, they can look after their family a little bit more. Like there's more balance in it. And it is interesting because everyone's in a different situation, but I think that really stuck with me. It was like, oh, you can do both. And I've almost been in that same thing where it's like, I need to put all my energy into playing. I can't even think about what comes after. But that's a mistake. And you need to make sure that, you can have time for both.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys as pro athletes know you got a window, right? It's going to end at some point. And for me, having you on here and chatting with you and you sharing your story, like you went out on your terms, right? I mean, so to speak, you didn't go out because you were busted up. And so that, that's a fortunate thing in your situation. And I think there's a lot of athletes that can say that wasn't the case for them. So, tip of the hat to you for that, man. That's cool.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, it's tough. It is tough because, that's your identity is, playing the game and being this person where, the excitement of it as well. It's a hard thing to walk away from. But, at the same time, it's that balance that you need and, to make sure that everything's going the right way as well. So, yeah, but it is tough. It's not an easy decision, especially when it's been your whole life for a long time. It's gradual. You have to make small little changes, to everything, to life in general. And to be able to do that takes time. It takes practice. You don't just figure it out in one day. Just like when you started playing the game, you didn't figure it out in one day. It took you years and years of repetition and training and experiences to understand it. So it's the same thing with transitioning out of it. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes talking to people and networking to really, figure it out. So, if you attack it with the same athlete mindset, you'll be okay.
Well, it's the easiest way to say that. I think it's the transition that we all go through where we identify, like you said, you identified as a professional rugby player, I identified as a professional hockey player, and that's who we are. Or excuse me, we identify as that's what's who we are, right? But in the reality is it's what we did. It's not who we are. And coming to that realization and being able to reflect and look back and share a special part of your life with other people through coaching, for example, is great. But then you learn that there is so much more to life than what you thought the entire world was at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I do love it. And maybe I need to see if this is the correct way to think about it. But yeah, I think even like the Players Association stuff, like it's my ability to continue to give back to the game and stay connected to the game, and to provide opportunities for players and support players as well. So, whether or not that's going to be a career, I think I'm still figuring out. But, it's definitely, it's crazy because you're living and breathing it. You're completely, encapsulated in it, in your world. And then, once you stop, it's a bit like, oh, now what? Or, am I still getting that same excitement or that same feeling? But then you realize, oh, you don't really need that. You have to kind of come to terms with it, but then also, find something that, not replaces it, but also kind of, fills that void, I would say.
Yeah, that's something Carmi talks about with pretty much everybody we have on. It's impossible to replace the thrill of running out into a stadium wherever you're playing, whether it's overseas or here or when you played in college. I mean, you can't replace it. I've learned a lot about that through the guests, yourself included, that we've had on here, Chris, and that's I have a great appreciation for that. I just have one more thing. I got to know your former coach, Mike Tolkien. I worked with him for, I think, 2 seasons. He was gracious to bring me in on PR7s, which I love doing. I didn't know what a hockey fan he was until I got to know him. I didn't know what a hockey fan that another Xavier alum, Mike Petrie, is. So where's your, are you a Ranger fan? Or are you a big hockey fan? Is that one of your hobbies? That's something you like to do?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Rangers fan, but I wouldn't say it's like, I think rugby's taken up so much of my time. Like I would watch hockey. I've been to a bunch of Rangers games, and I really do love that. I love the sport, but I would say like my fandom, rugby takes up a lot of that space still. So, but I think definitely once I'm still moving on, I'll definitely still be a hockey fan. My friends up in Lake Placid, I have some family friends in Lake Placid, and they're all massive hockey fans. One of them's a hockey ref, and we used to go out and play. We used to play knee hockey in the basement and, play as much as we could. And yeah, it's such a great game. And I definitely need to continue to watch. And my girlfriend wants to go to a game too, so I'm going to take her to a Rangers game as well. So.
Right on.
People think rugby's violent. Knee hockey is the most violent sport out there when you're a kid.
Yeah, you're just checking each other full on into the walls. It's such a great time. It was a great time.
Yeah. Well, Chris, we can't thank you enough for this, man. Joining us from Singapore, Carmi, that's a new record. I think we had somebody else that was overseas. I'm drawing a blank, but
Ebby was in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's right. Ebby was in Switzerland. So he's a former hockey player too. Yeah. So
21
Chris,
hours.
Yeah. Thanks so much for doing this. Congratulations on an amazing career you had and as a player. And we wish you the very best in all the things you're doing away from the pitch, but still involved in the great sport of rugby. Thanks for doing this, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you guys.
You too.
Thank you,
That'll do it.
Chris.
That'll do it for episode 17 of When the Game Ends. We'll see you next time with our latest and greatest and all new edition, episode 18. For Chris Mattina, Mike Carmen, Ben Holden saying thanks for watching When the Game Ends.